Hello and welcome back to me and my screwdriver, the only channel that actually likes Super Mario Kart. Don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near the best Mario Kart game, but it's certainly not the worst. I mean, for goodness sake, 64 is right there. With that being said though, with Mario Kart World releasing soon and ranking all 96 tracks from 8 Deluxe being way too hefty of a task for me right now, I decided to rank the 20 tracks found in Super Mario Kart. At the end, I will collect the averages of the track themes to figure out which is the best theme in the game, and in doing so, give my overall opinions on the themes themselves, as it feels awkward to try and cover an entire track theme within just one of the tracks, and it also feels odd to stretch out over all the different tracks through the entire video. And as an added bonus, as I'm ranking, I'll talk about the 3 tracks that I specifically want to be remade as a retro. With all that said though, let's get on to the worst track in the game. Before I do that, I want to mention the maps I'm using in this video were not made by me. The website I sourced them from will be linked in the description. Oh, and obligatory, this is just my opinion pre-warning, and there may be controversial opinions warning. Alright, let's go. As you can see, I've given the tracks a rating out of 10. I'll do this for all of them so that you can get an idea of what I view each track to represent, because obviously people's perceptions on what each tier means is in some way different, specifically B tier for some reason. The concept of a B tier is so divisive. Anyways, the worst track in my opinion has to be Bowser's Castle 3. I was honestly shocked this was my lowest rated course, especially after the Shredder's propaganda of it being one of the good ones, but I genuinely haven't had fun on this track. For starters, the narrow section here doesn't feel satisfying. Usually in my Mario Karts, I do like tight turns and narrow paths, however with Super Mario Kart's controls, that just can't work. Following a couple of hops and a large turn, we get to the coolest part of the track, these small islands you hop between. Yeah, I've never been a fan. I get what they were going for with the swapping between multiple paths, but the fastest path is the left side during gameplay, and that's basically just a straightaway. The only time you would choose the other side is if the items on the left have run out, but even then the item interactions aren't a big enough focus in Super Mario Kart for that to be an incentive. If this was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe where item changes the race, it'd be a different story. But here it's just not. Coming off of that is a tight turn into another narrow path, which I take huge issue with, not because of the path itself, but what's at the end of it. The thwomps. Overall, I like the thwomps as an obstacle, but here they're a major issue because the way they're positioned here is they're 4 in a row across the entire narrow track, meaning if all the thwomps are down at once, when you're driving through, there's nothing you can really do except for just running into them. Pair that with the fact it feels like CPUs just drive through obstacles, and that's me dropping 4 places for something that's not my fault. Then once again, there's a turn into a tight path, except now, there's 3. For me personally, I think the split paths here are too immediate after the turn for you to really get a chance to pick which path you want to go on. You kind of just get what you get. I do appreciate each path coming with a unique challenge though, the first being jumping over the ramp to hit the speed boost, the second being the same but with item boxes this time, and then the third is a free speed boost, but it's the outermost one so you're wasting time actually getting to it. Finally, there's one last turn and 2 thwomps blocking the fastest way to the finish line, which is neat and one of the few positive things I have to say about this track. Overall, while I do like some of what the track is doing, the negatives heavily outweigh the positives. I mean, for fuck's sake, it's Hydrogen Bomb versus Copping Baby out here. Yeah, I have a path that could be fully blocked off, but at least I get 2 kinda cool obstacles right at the end. On top of obstacle, the first track in the game does. I don't know, I'm pretty sure I'm in the minority when it comes to my faults in this track, but I can't bring myself to rank it above any of the others. Moving on to the D tier with a 2 out of 10 track, we have Choco Island 1. This one won't take as long as Bowser's Castle 3. Let's get the elephant out of the room. The Choco Island theme looks ugly. I know I meant to save this till later, but I physically can't not mention it. And let me make it clear, I overall like how this game looks considering the hardware limitations. Although I play indie games so I see pixel art style and go mad, so maybe my input isn't the most reliable. But this track just looks awful. I also just think it's insanely short. All of these tracks are, again, hardware limitations, but this track is absurdly short and I don't know why. As for the actual track design, there's bumps dotted around the track which don't really do anything except make collecting certain item boxes a bit more tedious. Even then though, there's plenty beforehand without bumps blocking them, so what's the point of this challenge? A couple of very basic turns take us to this short section with mud, which doesn't slow you down but makes turning harder, which could be a unique obstacle if used well. But the issue is, you're not going in a straight line here anyways. Not being able to turn doesn't really change how you're playing this track. And then that's literally it. However, I do want to mention what I really like about this track, the piranha plants dotted around the off-road. These piranha plants are placed in what I would consider the perfect places, because if I do end up falling into the off-road, I seem to hit them 60% of the time, which shows how effective they are. Since it's so difficult to go into the off-road, the punishment being a bit more severe makes sense, and it's pretty decent track design all things considered. So while I don't like a lot about this track, what I do like, I really like. Still in D tier at a 2.5, we have Choco Island 2. Yeah, these tracks really suck. There's quite a few basic turns to start things, but that quickly transforms into this really narrow road, which can be quite challenging to effectively traverse, considering the slight traction issues in the Choco Island maps. However, exiting that portion leads onto this massive mud pit, which had the same issue as before. You can just drive through it without many consequences. At least there's a couple coins stuck in there, I guess. Finishing up on the mud pit brings us onto this excessive amount of bumps, which, okay, to be fair, at that point it's just funny, I'll be honest. This is what put the track above Choco Island 1. And that's basically the end of the track. What an interesting and thought-provoking piece of art. If you can't tell by how short that part was, I want to get out of this shithole of Choco Island tracks, so let's jump into the next shithole. With a 3 out of 10, Donut Plains 1 slots in. A big reason this track places so low is its placement in the game. The track is right after Mario Circuit 1, the first track in the game, so this should be a place to test your skills you've just learned, right? Not really. It's honestly an easier track due to the excessive amount of turns. I mean, look at this, what is that? And when it's not a massive turn, the turns are still extremely easy. I will give the track credit for properly introducing the concept of a mushroom shortcut, shown through this gap in the wall in the off-road. Honestly though, what annoys me about this course is there is a possibility for danger right there. Water is such a dangerous obstacle because of how long you stay in it after falling, but the water in this track is all blocked off. Of course, I understand this is the second track in the game, but I think at least one side of the bridge could have been exposed so that you could possibly fall in. Really though? Of course I've criticised the fact that it's easy right after the first track, but it doesn't technically do anything wrong as a track, it just has an extremely unfortunate placement in the game. Ending the D tier off with a 4 out of 10, I have Ghost Valley 2. This track was actually quite close to being a B tier, barely missed out because of the same issue as Donut Plains 1. Wide turns. Looking at this map, you may say a couple turns do look like you could steer off, especially this one, but when you're actually playing, that's not the case. Where the track differs from Donut Plains 1 is it includes a feather shortcut, not the first one in the game, but the first one on this list. What I like about the other feather shortcuts is they take a lot of skill. This one though, not really. It's actually really easy, it's just hoping you pull the feather in the first place, which is what the mushroom shortcut is for. Because of that, this shortcut could have just been that, a mushroom shortcut, and it wouldn't change. The ending segment of this track gives it the edge over the track beforehand, because boost panels are basically a guaranteed better placement, but I particularly like how this one is positioned. The narrow path it's on is littered with absolutely no walls, and not only that, but to get to it in the first place, a particularly difficult sharp turn has to be taken, making it very easy to end up falling off after hitting the boost. The risk-reward dynamic makes this ending straight away really unique to really anything else in the game, and so earns this track the title of the best D tier track. Skipping C tier and going straight to B tier with a 4.5 out of 10 is Donut Plains 3. This map is a bit tricky to judge for me because the aspects I do like, I love, but when it comes to the negatives, they're really things I despise, so I think a little below a 5 out of 10 works. As for the main thing I dislike, it's this starting turn. Like I mentioned in Donut Plains 1, falling into water in this game is one of the harshest punishments, so pairing that with an extremely difficult turn, it hurts the overall enjoyment I get on this track. Of course, skill issue and all that, but I do think this is somewhat poorly thought out. Following a wider turn takes you onto this unique bridge portion where you have to hop over the water. This is a good use of water. It's not difficult to hop over it, but I wouldn't say it's easy, because there's definitely times that I've left it a bit too late and ended up falling because of it. This obstacle just also wouldn't work with basic off-road because off-road isn't too punishing in this game. Across this bridge is a very narrow path surrounded by off-road, but also water. I really like this segment. I think it's doable enough to where the water feels justified, but also tricky enough to keep the track actually engaging. And the added off-road means being bumped by other players isn't a complete death sentence. And then we get to the final portion, which I really don't like. For starters, I think we can all agree this track is relatively challenging. This portion could be added to Donut Plains 1 and not feel out of place. I think the main issue is the placement of the moles. A hazard like this should block off the fastest way to traverse the track. Here though, they're blocking the slower path, and so aren't really all that effective. Not to mention, even when the moles are kinda close to the quickest option, the moles aren't even always a present hazard, as they can be below the ground and so they don't always come off as threatening, which just leads to this becoming a boring section of the track as it relies on the moles. So, while Donut Plains 3 has some pretty high highs, its lows are pretty shocking. Following that, we have another 4.5 out of 10, which basically means I think the tracks are about the same in quality. However, I looked at them side by side and decided which one I'd rather play on for all eternity. And so, just barely better than Donut Plains 3 is Mario Circuit 3. I don't think there has been a track remade more than this one, and I cannot understand why. It was the first track created for the game, but that's really it. The track isn't that bad though, just a little basic with a pretty big flaw. Like the other Mario circuits, the main selling point is the sheer amount of turns, unless you're Mario Circuit 1, but that doesn't count. The first few are just fine, not much to comment on until you get to this oil spill. It's so out of the way, I'm convinced no one has ever fallen victim to it. It is kind of funny though, so 10 out of 10 track. Then you've got another turn until you get to another turn, but I have something to talk about with this one. This is an extremely tight turn. It's quite difficult to take, but holy shit is it fun to master. Drifting inwards as possible, barely missing the colourful blocks, and just about not going into the off-road, sometimes only being saved by the row of pipes bouncing you onto the track, is genuinely a really enjoyable part of the course. Then just a few more turns until we get to a mushroom shortcut. I don't have much to say about it. I'm always a fan of shortcuts being here, and I guess the fact it avoids another oil spill is a bonus. So far this is pretty fine, 6 out of 10 track. I hope nothing at the end ruins it. Oh look, something at the end ruins it. This boost panel, to me, takes out any challenge this course has. It's such an easy boost to hit, and there's absolutely no obstacles in front of you, so it just becomes a free pass to first place, because none of the CPUs can even keep up. What I liked about Ghost Valley 2's boost was it required some skill to take, and it felt rewarding. But here there's absolutely no challenge, and without the boost this is just boring straight away anyways, so refusing to take the boost doesn't make the track much better either. As a result, while the track is just fine for the most part with a really solid turn, it also has one section that kind of just ruins the track for me. Oh well, at least the 4 times this track came back and proved it, right? In the middle of B tier with a 5 out of 10 is the first track of the game, Mario Circuit 1. Ignore the like 10 straightaways anyways, let me explain why it's pretty high. For starters, let's make it clear. This is a tutorial track to teach players how to play the game. It being this easy is a good thing. Having this large straight section with a couple of coins dotted around makes sense as it's the first track. This turn at the end though is also quite nice, as the most inward path is blocked by a couple pipes that you can weave between. Most players are probably going to try to go as fast as possible, and so may try to go between the pipes, although the feeling teaches them about the concept of an obstacle. You've then got another straightaway with item boxes, once again teaching the players until we have an actually kind of tricky portion. Obviously not that hard, but it's possible to screw up on due to the turns being a little bit tight on both sides of this track. Again, relative to the rest of the track, this is on the harder side, allowing the player to properly use the turning they've now learned how to do. There's also this large portion of road, which does 2 things to me. One, it lets the player know how the off-road works, as I wouldn't be shocked if many just drove through it, seeing the road on the other side. But also, it's a mushroom shortcut, just not an obvious one. Most people will learn about the mushroom shortcuts from Donut Plains 1, so when coming back to this track, it gives it this new thing that players didn't think they could do before, giving it a little replay value. And after that, the track is basically done. Of course, if this track was placed anywhere else in the game, it would probably be the worst because of how boring it is. But, as the first track of the Mario Kart franchise, it does a fantastic job as a tutorial, better than some of the later starter tracks like Figure 8 Circuit. Now, with a 5.5 out of 10, just after the first track of the game, and probably the most controversial opinion in this video, not even cracking the A tier is this game's Rainbow Road. I want to say this track was everywhere when I was first ranking. The amount of times I've moved this track's placement is genuinely insane. It started in the S tier, then to the A tier, then to the C tier, then went back up to the A tier, but now on the lower side. Then it went to the first track of the B tier before slowly, placement by placement, crawling its way up to the 9th track on the list. This track is brutal, having tight turns and very thin segments, with the track and absolutely no walls. That works to both its aid and also demise. What I do like about this track though, is it has access to the feather, meaning a lot of turns can be hopped over as shortcuts, which is quite nice. So starting the race, you come onto a turn, having a bit of a straightaway with a couple of whomps, which I'll talk about more later, before coming in on my major talking point, the ramps. Now, this is something you should note about the ramps in this game. They are yellow. This is something to note about Rainbow Roads in this game. It has every colour ever. Here's something to note about the colour yellow. It is one of every colour ever. The amount of times I've messed up because the ramp was too difficult to spot because of this track's aesthetic is just really unacceptable. I can't even tell if this is a me issue or a game issue because I've never heard anyone else really mention it. I guess once you've learned the track they aren't as big of an issue, but even then I still find myself tripping up on it even after playing this game so many times. A couple more turns take us to a very tight path with 2 sets of thwomps littering it. These thwomps are extremely effective obstacles, especially because of their property of damaging the player just by touching them, rather than simply bumping into them like normal thwomps in the game. Coming off of this turn though, is the part I'm most divided on. This right here is in my opinion the hardest turn in the game by far, not only requiring quite a tight turn in the first place, but also then onto an extremely thin path, all of it surrounded by the void. This turn is extremely satisfying to take when there's no other vehicles. Here's the thing, one of my main issues with Super Mario Kart, as a whole is colliding with another vehicle can be way too punishing. Either completely losing your speed, or sending you flying off the track, and sometimes just causing you to spin out for no reason. And so when you've got a narrow part like this, it becomes more tedious than exhilarating. And I know, skill issue, but after a few attempts on the time trials, I pretty much mastered this turn, yet doing it in an actual race was genuine torture. So because I'm ranking this based on how fun it is to race on, this one turn is a huge hit to my opinion on Rainbow Road. Luckily, things get a bit more positive. You get these two split paths where the center acts as a mushroom shortcut. In all fairness, I have found this to be a bit janky. Sometimes you don't get enough air on the ramp, other times you go too far over, but to me that creates a bit of a risk to the shortcut, so I'll allow it. Although I will say the amount of times I've been caught on the edge of the ramp just because it stretches a little bit onto the two paths and it's caused me to fall off is infuriating. But I won't lie, with how much it happens, it might just be a skill issue. As for the other two paths, the left one is easier but a bit slower, whereas the right one is faster and has two item boxes, but actually turning off of it without ending up in the void can be very challenging and gives more of that risk-reward dynamic that I crave. Other than that though, the rest of the track is a large straightaway with a few forms to avoid, ending Rainbow Road. I can completely understand if people disagree with my take on this track because of how simply iconic it is. Hell, that's why it was originally quite high, but I don't think that's an entirely fair thing to factor into a ranking in my opinion. So, Rainbow Road remains in B tier. Speaking of B tier, ending it off with a 6 out of 10 track is Ghost Valley 1. Putting this right after Rainbow Road feels like a fucking crime, Jesus Christ. It doesn't help that I don't have much to say about this track. It's one of those tracks that I like because I like it. But the first few sections, I really have nothing to comment on. I like the few turns that are there, and I appreciate this tiny bit in the centre, where the track goes a little inwards, creating a small part where you can get caught on the wall, causing you to break the block and fall off. Alright, I completely understand if you think I'm reaching, I just need something to analyse, man. Where I start to like the track quite a bit is this section with the two item boxes, right behind ramps that you have to hop over. Of course, if you do go for it and fail hitting the ramp, due to being right next to the opening, there's a good chance you'll fall off the track, which is pretty neat. One turn later and a ramp over a small pit brings me to my favourite shortcut in the game, which is probably what makes me like this track so much. This is a feather shortcut, which I'm already a fan of, but also it's one of the very narrow paths, once again surrounded by nothing to save you but the pit below. To add to this, ahead of you on the main track is also an open part in the barriers to the endless void. This makes this a very challenging turn that's so rewarding because of the massive turn it skips if taken successfully. I genuinely cannot think of a better shortcut in this game, and honestly is up there for one of the best in the entire Mario Kart series. At least from a gameplay angle, those double dash shortcuts are too charming. And that's really all I have to say for Ghost Valley 1. It's a short, simple course of two sections that I think have enough depth to help this track in the rankings and close off the B tier. The first track of our A tier with a 6 out of 10, which I know is the same score as Ghost Valley 1, but I think there's enough of a case for this to be an A tier for them to be separated, and anyways, it is Mario Circuit 4. The only track of the game to never come back, and seemingly is even missing out on the amalgamation of Mario circuits found in a world, which holy shit, that's a new form of Patty. And honestly, I don't really care if it comes back or not. I guess it would be nice if more people could play this track, but I mean, let's be real, it's a good track for Super Mario Kart, and people aren't missing out on much. Anyways, as for the track itself, an aspect I adore about it is how varied it is in its turns. Here, it's a pretty average turn, whereas here, it's a bit tighter, and then here, it's an extremely wide turn, but it goes into a thin piece of the track. Despite it following the Mario Circuit formula of adding a load of turns, it still feels fresh with each one. Even then though, I feel like it somehow falls into the trap of having some pretty boring straightaways. Besides the oil slick and the strike portion, all the straightaways are completely empty of hazards, and it's honestly a shame because when there are obstacles, they're quite solid. You got this turn up here littered with pipes, and the inward turn here has some pipes blocking the way, both being effective obstacles. I'm also not the biggest on this mushroom shortcut. In Zelda Plains 1, the shortcut acted as a tutorial for shortcuts, and in Mario Circuit 3 it at least skipped a bit of the track with obstacles, but here it's not skipping enough to feel like enough of a shortcut to be included for me. Really, it's the turns that make me like this track a lot, but everything else is mostly just solid or kinda bad, so the track barely gets an A tier. With a 6.5, Mario Circuit 2 finishes the Mario Circuits off. I really like this turn at the beginning. It feels really satisfying to drift through for some reason, especially when you've got these two pipes positioned on this corner. I'm not going to sugarcoat it though, the rest of this track is pretty mid. Mostly just some fun enough turns and straightaways that is until we get to the peak. Mario Circuit 2 is really the only track to have what I would consider a set piece. A set piece in a Mario Kart track, to me, is a segment with both fun gameplay and a sick aesthetic. For example, gliding over the stands of people in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in Mario Kart Stadium. It's got the good visuals and some solid gameplay to go along with it. Mario Circuit 2's version of this is the ramp, going over parts of this track. Of course, it's not the spectacle that other games' tracks have, but it's still a cool visual, especially when you hop over the other racers. As for the gameplay, you have to position yourself perfectly before hitting the boost because of the pipes on the other side, blocking the faster route. This one section elevates the rest of the track heavily for me, so even though the rest of the track is mainly just fine, this part really sells me on this track personally. I think it's been a while since we introduced a new track theme, so at another 6.5 out of 10, I have Vanilla Lake 1. Before getting onto the actual track, I need to mention the physics. Of course, the ice track has ice physics, and I think that's why most people dislike this and Vanilla Lake 2. That and one of the hazards, but I'll get to that later. The ice physics are well accounted for, as most of the track is quite wide, so while it's definitely still plausible you'll end up in the off-road, it's not so often it gets annoying, and I think that's exactly how this track should work. Not to mention, the ice physics make it so anytime the track is a bit empty, there's still something to focus on, instead of just mindlessly driving like other tracks with not much happening at times. Speaking of, the first turn leads onto this bit of a straightaway before another turn that has a couple of pipes. I like these pipes because they aren't in a straight formation like most in the game, they're a bit more dotted around so you have to weave through them. Then though, we get to what kind of drags this track down. The snow blocks are interesting obstacles, because hitting them brings you to a complete halt, but they also break upon contact, in theory making the track easy, which is somewhat interesting. The issue I have with them in this track is they're placed in a way where it's one after the other that you have to keep avoiding, especially here where you've got one set to dodge and then straight after you have another. This goes for the other lot of snow blocks to a degree, but I don't think it's nearly as bad. Before the other set though is a really fun hazard, this crack in the ice. What's cool about this is it's in a way like the bridge from Donut Plains 3. If you end up in its path, you can use a well-timed hop to dodge it, but if you do mess up, it's a huge blow to your placement in the race, and I do really like that about it. Coming up after this is a larger crack in the ice, which I don't like as much. I think if it was moved slightly upwards and a bit to the right, it would be a lot more interesting, but to me it's a bit too out of the way to really care for it. That may be the end of the track, but there's one more thing I want to mention. Across the track there's quite a few sections like this, where you can hop over the off-road, which I find kinda neat. So, unfortunately for this track, as much as I love a lot of what it's doing, the snowblocks do drag it down quite a bit, and the lack of use for this large crack in the ice does hurt it slightly as well. This track is also the first one I actively want to see remade. I think there's a lot of good ideas that could be very easily transported into a newer Mario game. I will say this does appear to be in one of the tracks that will be used in the in-between segments in Mario Kart World, but I think this could definitely work as a full new retro. It's been a while since we've seen Bowser's Castle, so with a 7 out of 10 I have Bowser's Castle 1. Still no Bowser's Castle 2. Let me get the obvious out the way. 1, 2, 3 straight away. I have no excuse for the first one, but I think the second one is kind of justifiable. The forms compared to other obstacles are a bit on the stranger side, so having that section to introduce them kind of makes sense, but I am reaching. The third one though is completely excusable and actually really cool. This segment uses the bumping into racers, sending them flying well. The 3 speed panels that you're going to want to get are next to these square pockets on the side. Getting bumped into them wastes a lot of time, and so once again is a great risk and reward mechanic. On top of that, this is an earlier track, so some players may have a bit of difficulty controlling well with the speed boost, and so just driving onto the pockets is possible. Building off of that, at the end of the straightaway are a load of thwomps, so controlling the much more speedy car with thwomps to dodge acts as a fun obstacle. Taking this large turn takes us to some jumps with some thwomps at the end. This means kinda like the jumps in Mario Kart Circuit 2, you have to position yourself before the final hop. In this final turn, there's a load of coins that are really fun to try and collect as many as possible, even if the coins, at least to me, don't really make too much of a difference in this game. Exiting the next set of hops, there's a few thwomps on this turn, making it a bit more challenging. I like almost everything in this track, it's really just the amount of straightaways that are absurd and drag it down heavily. Now we have our final A tier, and also our final track theme that we haven't seen yet, the Cooper Beach. Which one though? Well, at a 7 out of 10, I have Cooper Beach 1. I think this is the definition of short but sweet. I'm not joking, this track is like less than a minute and 30 seconds. However, despite that, the content here is enough for me to like it. The track starts with a turn before taking you into a decision. You can either go to the small island with the item box, which is also a very slightly faster path, however there is a fish blocking it, and it's surrounded by a bit of deep water, making it a bit more risky than the other path, the bigger island, with ramps at the end. I love the idea of the ramps being used to spend less time in the water, making things a little faster. This takes us to another island, with a turn to bring us to another island. This island is by far the most interesting, being a lot larger than the others, but with off-road in the centre to drive around. Each side has 6 item boxes, and in my experience, it doesn't matter too much which side you go down. The right might be a little bit faster, but I can't really tell. What's actually interesting to me is that it's quite difficult to pick a path in the first place. Not in the Bowser's Castle freeway, but in the way where the turn to either side of the island is a bit tight, which I do appreciate. Also, this off-road acts as a massive mushroom shortcut, which feels unique and large enough to be a worthy inclusion. The final island has a ramp which can actually take you straight across to the next island without going into the water. And with that, the track ends. If you can't tell, basically all I said was positive. My issue, it's a little bit on the basic side. Not boring, but at the end of the day, there aren't really any standout moments. It's all just consistently good, which honestly works for me. With the A tier finished, we're down to 5 tracks left, all of a different theme funnily enough. Those are Bowser's Castle 2, Ghost Valley 3, Vanilla Lake 2, Donut Plains 2, and Cooper Beach 2. A lot of 2s, I've only just realised that. And of those 5, 2 of them are typically placed way lower than the top 5. Hell, they're lucky if they can crack the top 10. So I've got a tough task convincing you on why some of these courses are good. Going into the S tier with an 8 out of 10, the course most of you have probably been waiting for, Bowser's Castle 2. This track is infamous for being bad, and I have never understood why. Hopefully I can convince at least one person this track isn't egregious. The track starts with a turn leading to this cool section with these ramps, with the first ramp and second ramp being blocked by thwomps, making you have to look at the position they're currently in and try to decide which one is going to not end with you driving face first into a thwomp. There's a turn onto this other turn that I find quite satisfying for some reason, I can't really explain why, and then the well-known stop here path. This is usually why people say they don't like the track, and I have to ask, why are you so boring? Where's the joy? Where's the whimsy? Having a path that leads into lava is funny as fuck, and it's not really that big of a deal. You might take it on your first playthrough, and then you realise, oh, don't do that again. But even then, that's not the end of it, because this can be used as a feather shortcut. It's up for debate if it's intentional. I'm leaning towards yeah. I don't think the fact it can only be done in 100cc discredits the idea of it being purposeful, considering you can only play the special cup in 100cc. I think it's obvious the developers made this with 100cc in mind and possibly just 100cc. The shortcut skips a straightaway with thwomps at the end and leaves you in a little bit of an awkward spot, as you have to take the left path furthest from where you land unless you want to slam into a wall. Speaking of the other path, without taking the shortcut, that's by far the way quicker path, and is very satisfying to weave between. Exiting both paths leads to a row of 4 thwomps, which make things so much more difficult, it's actually insane. The next split path section also seems to turn people off the track, and I can't really defend it, no one ever picks the item box path, it's fucking worthless. However, turning into the next part is pretty cool. It's kind of like a mix of the first part from this track, and also the split section from BC3, except now, you can pick which path to take. The wall dividing the path also acts as a bit of an obstacle if you're not being careful. On both the second to last island and the exit from the section have thwomps lined up separated from each other, meaning you have to line yourself up before using the ramp, kind of like what feels like half the other tracks in the game do. There's one last thwomp on the end turn which is put in such a way it can actually get you. Then in all fairness there is a very long straightaway with fuck all to do, so that's a pretty big negative. I'm gonna be honest, I think people hating on this track, and I know I'm going to sound hypocritical as a person who didn't like Rainbow Road because one turn was too difficult, but they have a skill issue. This is also the second track I actively want to return in another game. I think in a game with better controls, a lot more people would enjoy this track, and yes, they should keep the stop path if they do remake it. Actually, Mario Kart World DLC anyone? The feather is already in that game anyways, it wouldn't be too outlandish. So from one controversial track to one that actually I think people are just shocked to make it this high, as an 8.5 out of 10, I have Donut Plains 2. This track always has something going on. Most of the time, but we'll get to that later. The track starts at the turn after the item boxes, leading to a section slowly getting narrower and narrower, with it in a slight U-shape. Similar to Bowser's Castle 1, this is a good use of the bumping mechanic in this game, because it's very easy to end up on the off-road, but it's not like a major punishment. This then leads to the highlight of the track, this giant lake. The reason I love this so much is it's so difficult to not fall in, but insanely avoidable at the same time. The turn doesn't feel as unfair as the one on Donut Plains 3, the lake acts as a justifiable punishment. This is also especially because the water is only on one side. If you want to play things safer, the water isn't even a hazard because you can just stay on the outside near the road, so it's a lot easier, but doesn't reward as much as sticking nearer to the water. And what makes it easier to fall in is the moles dotted around this portion of the track. The moles aren't an obstacle I've talked about much yet, so I should explain how they work. moles attached to your vehicle, and then you have to hop repeatedly to stop them slowing you down. Obviously, hopping alone makes precise movements more difficult. These moles increase the excitement this portion brings. It's not like this is the only good use of the moles either. The second use, while a little reflective of Donut Plane 3's usage, still has its qualities, as the turn is extremely wide, so it's not impossible to imagine someone getting caught out by them. The last usage is my favourite though. This turn is extremely challenging to take going as inward as possible, and obviously on a wide turn that's what you want to do, so this hard manoeuvre is rewarded with the lack of moles and getting through the track faster. I should mention the segment between the last two moles. I think compared to the rest of the track it's a weak point, but in general, considering Super Mario Kart as a whole, it certainly isn't. It's not too technical, but it's just a fun time. And a long straightaway straight again, because what the fuck is this? It extremely slowly gets thinner over time, but not enough to save it from being a boring section. Even then, despite the straightaway and the lackluster second mole usage, this is a fantastic track, always being in some way intriguing. And for the final joint score track, with another 8.5 out of 10 and the third best track in the game, first on the podium, I have Vanilla Lake 2. This track revolves around the giant crack in the ice in the centre of the track, giving this course a bit of a gimmick as most of the hazards to be found here is the lake itself. It does what I liked about the one portion of Donut Plains 2 for the entire track, which I'm not against in the slightest. The track starts pretty simple with a large turn before the first obstacle, a few pipes dotted around this area for you to go in between, which becomes quite challenging with the more slippery physics. After this is why most people hate the track, the massive blocks of snow. I get why people dislike this segment in theory. These blocks stop all speed, and if you don't know how to turn, you'll end up going into all six and on the line. Let me raise this point. Once you hit one snow block, it's over. If you think how it is now is too difficult, so long as you hit one snow block on the edge of one of the chunks, every other lap you'll go through, it's just fine, so long as you aren't bumped. But even then, squeezing between these gaps without hitting a single block is one of the most satisfying parts of this game because of its difficulty. Honestly, once you do that once, it's a lot easier to do it again and again, and let me make it clear, it's not like this was a skill I built up over years of training. I was able to do it consistently third time I was playing this track, which raises my point against a lot of other rankings of this game. Excuse me if I get a little people online here, but I want to raise the point pretty briefly. Most people who rank the tracks of this game only do it to rank the tracks, whereas I'm coming at it from an angle of I already like this game, let me talk about it. So to me at least, people like Shifrillis, who by the way I do like, play this track once, don't like it because they haven't gotten used to its layout, and then rank it when I reckon if they had the same philosophy for something like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, yeah, the output would be a bit more favourable, but I think in general it would be similar. Maybe I'm wrong and I have the wrong opinion, but that's at least how I see it from someone who's come back to this game every now and then for a few years. Anyways, following the track a little bit takes us to the coolest part, the 3 split paths. The first one is the most obvious, these segmented ice islands that you have to hop along, dodging one pipe in doing so. It's probably the most neutral of the 3, both in difficulty and speed. The next one is the mushroom shortcut, that I've never used a mushroom for. It's the slowest, but the off-road is small enough for you to hop through and not waste a substantial amount of time. The most difficult and definitely my favourite though, is by hopping over the crack here and manoeuvring your way through the colourful blocks. Again, it's the hardest, but also the quickest, which is probably why I love it so much. Because, say it with me now, it's got that risk and reward factor. The ending of this track is really what drags it down. This portion here with the spread out snow blocks. These are literally everywhere on the track for a solid amount of time and feel unavoidable at times, because of them being so sudden after a turn. This section sucks enough to drag this track down while it's so close to being number 1. Of course, there are probably hundreds of different places to hop over different cracks, which just enhances this track design, so with all that considered, I think Vanilla Lake 2 earns a spot as the first track on the podium. We're down to 2 tracks, Ghost Valley 3 and Cooper Beach 2. Both tracks have some extremely good and unique qualities that could potentially earn either the top spot. So, coming up short with a 9 out of 10, and the last track of the S tier, I've got Cooper Beach 2. This track has a very simple gimmick, being narrow throughout, and the way it executes this idea is phenomenal. I'm going to go into specifics later, but for now, I want to talk about the general track. The track starts in this little pocket that you don't go into again after the start of the race. So by technicality, this is the first track to change layout over laps. From here, you take a left turn, and then another onto this really cool multi-path section. While there is more, there's 2 main paths that you're likely to take. The first one is pretty simple, having you drive through the water onto this small island with an item box, before trudging for a bit of water to return to the main island. It's simple and you get an item, but it's quite slow. Well, in comes the other path, where you traverse this thin segment with a lot of small pockets of deep water dotted around. What I especially like is the Cheep Cheep place where I have circles, making this a lot more challenging. Cheep Cheeps were awesome in Cooper Beach 1, but I never mentioned them there because I don't think they've really added anything, especially when compared to their use in this track. There are a few more paths that you can take, however these are the main ones you're likely to take, as I've already said. After this, the track becomes really difficult, at least to do quickly. Surrounding this thin strip of sand is off-road and shallow water, meaning if you're not in the centre, you're fucked. I also really like this bit. It's quicker to hop over the water here, but once again, there's a Cheep Cheep hopping around, acting as an effective hazard. From here, there's another turn onto possibly the thinnest portion of the track, but there's a load of opportunities to time your hops to save yourself somewhat. And with that, the lap ends. I adore the track, and I didn't even mention the really strange feather shortcut. Yeah, so right here in the centre of the island, surrounded by the colourful blocks, is a ramp. Now I'm assuming you're supposed to cross the finish line and immediately use the feather to directly hit the ramp. Is it strange you can drive around here when you can't do the same in Vanilla Lake 1? Yeah, but it's kind of funny. Of course you can also use the feather for a multitude of other things. Maybe the most uses of any feather courses. Well, except for one. With a 9.5 out of 10, the best Super Mario Kart track, in my objective opinion, is Ghost Valley 3. Going into this, I was honestly sure Cooper Beach 2 would end up at number 1, but upon replaying these courses, this track that I once didn't think twice about showed itself to be a masterpiece that it is. And also, to get it out of the way, yes, this is the final track I want to see remade as a retro. It's probably a bit biased, but who cares? Why do I love this track so much? Well, let's talk about it. It starts with an immediate right turn onto this segment with item boxes, which I really like. The right side has this crack in the road, which is cool but not what interests me. We've seen a lot of these small challenges where you need to hop over a ramp to get an item box, and this is another one of those. But this one is different because of the hole right after it. It just adds a little bit of extra challenge, and I don't know why, but I love it for that. It's not the hardest thing ever, but it just adds a little bit of flair. The shortcut, and this is just the first of the 3 I'm talking about. Yes, I'm aware there's an intentional feather shortcut right next to the square. The one I'm highlighting is more fun because you hop over the blocks that surround certain parts of the track. It's just a really fun feather shortcut, causing you to hold your drift between hopping over. This zigzag path has elements of Vanilla Lake 2 to it, requiring you to jump over the corners in order to get the most out of the path. At the end of it is the next shortcut I want to talk about. Now on paper, this looks the exact same as the other one. However, trust me, this one is much more precise. If you feather too early, you're not going to make it. If you feather too late, you're going to crash into the wall and lose all your speed. Use the feather at the perfect time, you get one of the most satisfying experiences in the game. Coming up after this is a hole directly in the middle of the road. It's not massive, but it's big enough for you to not be able to hop over it. So you have to go on either of the 2 really tight sides, which can cause some issues if you get knocked by another cart. One turn later brings us up to possibly the coolest section of any track. Remember when I said only Mario Circuit 2 had a set piece? I lied, because on this track lies the highlight of the entire game. Let's get the obvious out of the way. The path is littered with holes. That's cool, but not what interests me. This speed boost before a ramp is the final and coolest shortcut in this track. How it works is by hitting the speed panel, you're given the momentum to take a massive jump, sending you flying possibly over the races in first place. Isn't that just so cool? You get this movie-like scene of leaping above the competition and barely snagging the victory. It's just so fucking cool. And it's not like Mario Circuit 3 where this is an easy speed panel to hit. It's not really. And if you don't hit it, you're likely to hit the ramp which will send you into the hole in front of it. So for the last time, say it with me, it creates this risk and rewards dynamic. But I'm not finished, because where do you land after hitting the ramp? Here, and this path also makes the shortcut more difficult. It doesn't make a huge difference, but because of the zigzag shape, it can be quite difficult to land in the wrong spot and fall off the track, and that's the track. Unfortunately, there is this straightaway that caused the track not being a perfect score, but remove this and the track is fucking glorious. Literally, if they just added a hole somewhere in this final stretch to the finish line, this would be a 10 out of 10. Nintendo, you fumbled so fucking hard. I don't think I need to say it much else. I believe I made a compelling argument for why this track is the best track in Super Mario Kart. With that done, here's my completed tier list, from Bowser's Castle 3 to Ghost Valley 3. Now, I'm not done. Like I said earlier, I'm going to collect the averages of each track theme and talk about each of them, just to give my overall thoughts on the theme itself, because I feel like the track themes differ from one another in the track design to make this worth it. Not to mention, I didn't want to talk about the themes during the actual ranking, because obviously themes overlap between tracks, so it'd be really repetitive to say this track sounds like this for 4 different Mario circuits. Apart from the Choco Islands, I didn't really factor in visuals that much. either, mainly because I never think the actual look of the track defined a track in Super Mario Kart, besides something like Rainbow Road, whereas in, for example, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, something like Squeaky Clean Sprint wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for the setting of the track, but that's just me. Anyways, as the worst track theme, I've got Choco Island. Obviously. I've already said it, the track looks actively bad. I felt like making this place basically different shades of one colour, when they don't have the ability to properly detail the track, just wasn't really the greatest idea. I'm not even sure if that's what makes the course so ugly to me. I think most of it is the off-road texture, just being off-putting. The music is also just not that good. I don't know how, but it somehow manages to feel offbeat, I don't know. Also, speaking of the music, the video I found to listen to the music has an image of Choco Island 2's map, and I'm only just now noticing there's a ramp in the centre. I've been playing this game for quite a while, how the fuck did I not realise that? Oh well, it's probably because this track sucks. I'm also not huge on the gimmicks present in this theme. As much as I praise the piranha plants for making the off-road a bit more scary, the mods and bumps in the road feel uninspired and don't do enough to switch up the gameplay. With a massive step up from an average of 2.25 to 5.3 is Donut Plains. I'm gonna be honest, I think this theme has just been unfortunate with its track layouts because I don't really have a negative about this theme. The overall look of these tracks creates a more serene vibe that I really quite like. The highly saturated green for the grass really makes these tracks pop, and I think the water and bridges help to keep the tracks from ending up getting really repetitive in its visuals, something I can't say for the other themes. The music also reflects how the track looks, being the upbeat, anxiety-reducing melody that I would go as far to say is possibly the most iconic piece of music from the game, maybe only topped by Mario Circuit. Also funny Whistleman mention. As for the unique elements, there isn't really any besides the moles, which does to a degree bring this theme down a bit, but I mean, I like the moles. They're one of my favourite hazards when they're used correctly, of course. The only complaint I really have is it's a bit on the basic side. It is a basic grassland at the end of the day. Coming in with the same score, just slightly better as decided by me, is the Bowser's Castle theme. I know I've already structured this segment already by going in the order of aesthetics, music, and then gimmicks, but I don't care. The music is really good. It's pretty clear this game is based around Super Mario World, so remixing the final boss of that game's theme was such an obvious choice but executed so well. The rather intense imposing music really matches the vibe of struggling to dodge the crushing thumps above. And the bass, I mean come on, it's good! Onto aesthetics though, I can't deny the grey bricks aren't a bit boring, but I think the lava surrounding the track somewhat saves it. The gimmicks? It's just the thumps, which I do think serves the best hazard in the game. I didn't analyse the thumps themselves, but what I love about them is they aren't just a if you run into them you slow down like most other obstacles. They're that, and also, I'm gonna say it again, a risk and reward dynamic. Do you go a bit faster by going under them as they're about to fall and risk getting crushed, which is an insanely harsh punishment, or do you go a tad slower and drive around? I think they're quite a fun obstacle. It's questionable if this is a gimmick, but something else about Bowser's Castle is that they have a shitload of 90-degree turns, more than any other track theme, so the actual layouts differ between other track themes, which I find quite endearing. With a 5.5 you have the original Mario Circuit, and I'm not wasting your time, this track theme is boring, it looks boring, it doesn't have any unique gimmicks, which to a degree I get is meant to be in a sense the base plate for other tracks, but that to me doesn't excuse it. I guess they have the oil slicks, but that's genuinely it. Even then, they usually place out of the main path. Of course, the music for the course is iconic, but this rendition of it just genuinely is not that good. I think a lot of the remakes do it justice, just not the original. That's all I have to say. Moving on. Also, with an average of 5.5, since it's the only score they got, is Rainbow Road. I think it's pretty clear looking at this from an objective standpoint. This is the best track theme in the game, judging off the aesthetics, music, and gimmicks. Honestly, the looks, despite being iconic, maybe its weakest department. Obviously, the rainbow looks cool, but I still don't like how it obstructs the ramps. It's really the only time a track's aesthetics make it harder, and not in a cool, gimmicky way. As for the music, it's really good. Not as great as Bowser's Castle in my opinion, but I think this piece of music goes beyond how it sounds. It's meant to be this grand closing piece to send you off, and it does a fantastic job at that. The emphasizes the impression of this being a finale. The gimmicks as well, while limited to just the rainbow fonts, are really cool, just expanding upon a previous gimmick I already adored. So while the theme's average isn't good, I like the Rainbow Road theme. Okay, top 3. This is the creme de la creme of track themes, so with a 6.5 out of 10, it's the first worst one in the game. I'm Sujon in this one. I like being positive about the theme of the track I just ranked as number 1. The actual aesthetics for this track are quite boring, although there is something quite interesting about the booze floating around in the background. The music is an understandable approach, remixing World's Ghost House theme. It's not a theme that works through a racing game though. I guess it's kind of eerie considering this game is for 5-year-olds, but I don't know. The disappearing blocks are cool, but I kind of feel like they end up not being that interesting. I've never really hit a wall and then on another lap came back and fell off that same part. But all the tracks have at least one interesting feather shortcut, which changes the track design compared to other themes. Let's move on. With an average of 7.5, the runner-up for the best track theme is the Vanilla Lake theme. I'll be honest, I'm biased towards 3 track themes across Mario Kart games: desert, beach, and snow. So these top 2 heavily pander to me. I just think it's cool how you're driving on this icy layer of road with cracks forming around the track. Isn't that just kinda cool? The music also adds to my love for the theme. It really makes you feel like a winter wonderland that's being explored by these dickheads chucking shells at each other in carts. And the gimmicks? I love these things. I've already talked about how much I love these gimmicks, so I won't bore you again, but just know I really enjoy the snow blocks, ice physics, and cracks you can hop over. And so the best one is Kuma Beach. Yep, what a surprise. Woo, it's a beach track, it's got the best piece of music in the game, and it's got Cheep Cheep. That's my analysis. Bye. And so, with that, my ranking comes to a close. I know Super Mario Kart isn't exactly the Mario Kart with the most discourse surrounding it. I feel like my most controversial take of putting Rainbow Road relatively low will at most be met with the comments saying something like, dang, I would have put it higher. Anyways, but even if not many people care for this game, I care for this game, and I hope I've at least portrayed my passion well for this video. Yeah, it's got its flaws, there's a reason I didn't talk extensively about the driving mechanics, but it's got that retro game charm. I'm already planning to do both an 8 Deluxe and World ranking, but until those 2 massive projects, what should I rank next? Of course, I could be boring and go in game order, but what if I want to be a rebel? What if I want to do Super Circuit first? Anyways, I think I've said all I need to say. Like and subscribe to become a little screw I'll build my next table with. Fucking see ya.